Fox Point is a neighborhood in Providence, Rhode Island. Interstate 195 runs through its southern section. However, what you see now is not what you would have seen several decades ago. A cohesive community of working-class Cape Verdean Americans thrived here until the late 1960s. But things have changed. Houses have been demolished, families uprooted, and a community disintegrated. How did this happen? How did the interstate cause such a drastic change in a neighborhood's identity? In the mid-1800s, immigrants from Cape Verde, a small archipelago 300 miles off the west coast of Africa, came to the United States in search of the American dream. Their first stop was New Bedford, Massachusetts. Their second was Rhode Island, specifically the Fox Point section of Providence. In Fox Point, the main source of employment for Cape Verdeans was on the waterfront. Whether working in coal yards or loading scrap iron onto boats as longshoremen, labor related to the sea trade was pivotal to the Cape Verdean community.
It really was a fairly close neighborhood. Not perfect, but very close.
The center of the community was South Main Street, where the Boys Club was located. It was a second home for many of the youth, bringing kids together and keeping them out of trouble. Also on South Main Street were secondhand shops and general stores. Often, longshoremen would gather after work at the Three Lantern Bar on Pike Street. While Fox Pointers felt close inside their community, city officials saw Fox Point as run down and deemed it to be a slum.
But it by no means looked like an urban landscape of blight, which was how it was perceived by those who came in with urban renewal.
City officials saw housing rejuvenation as a way to restructure the demographic of the community. An opportunity for this to happen would come in the 1950s.
This is the American dream of freedom on wheels.
After World War II, as more cars hit America's roads, more traffic was created, and if action was not taken, the existing system of roads in America would not have met the country's transportation demands. In 1956, President Eisenhower envisioned a revolutionary highway system which would make interstate travel easier and faster. He signed into law the Federal Aid Highway Act. The act designated $51 billion, or the equivalent of $422 billion today, towards highway construction, making it one of the largest public works initiatives since the pyramids. Getting the Highway Act through Congress was one thing, but getting the highway to navigate through urban areas was a different task. Highways were often constructed in urban areas first, so that input from communities on highway routes was limited. Therefore, highways could be built wherever interstate planners wanted. In Rhode Island, planning for Interstate 195 began in 1947. Of all the factors that played into the highway planning process, cost efficiency was one of the highest priorities. But priorities that highway planners had in mind did not always correspond with the community's interests. The initial reaction to the interstate was shown by meetings that were held by the Fox Point Neighborhood Association to voice community concerns in the mid-1950s. Despite these meetings, the Neighborhood Association's participation in drafting I-195's route was not welcomed by highway planners. As a result, the artery of the Cape Verdean community, South Main Street, was ultimately where 195 ran. The Boys Club, and almost all secondhand stores and general stores, and most other Cape Verdean gathering places, were destroyed due to the highway being built. With money supplied by the federal government, the state government purchased houses that were in or around the path of the highway by eminent domain.
A tool called eminent domain. And the state government can acquire a piece of property, even against the property owner's will, and force them to leave.
The use of eminent domain often intimidated property owners to leave without resisting.
Big government scared some of the people. They saw the guy come in and they get a letter saying you got to sell it. They panicked and they took the money and they sold.
So for the Cape Verdeans, you have to understand that we didn't have any power because we were mostly renters. So you're dealing with power and entitlement and privilege, which was not ours.
When I-195 moved through Fox Point, the Providence Redevelopment Agency realized that it would open the door for urban renewal. Like the interstate highway system, this was a nationwide revolution, as hundreds of urban renewal programs were established across the country. The goal was to revitalize urban areas that city planners saw as blighted. In Providence, the Eastside Renewal project was commissioned by the Providence Redevelopment Agency and included Fox Point. The agency acquired houses and land through eminent domain and then demolished or rehabilitated properties, relocating their previous inhabitants. In December of 1954, the first plot of land was purchased by the Providence Redevelopment Agency, with 2/3 of the cost covered by the federal government. In the next year alone, 194 property owners in Fox Point would be evicted through the same process. Urban renewal interested citizens outside of the alleged slums because nicer cities would attract wealthier residents, increasing tax revenue and creating stronger city economies, making them safer and prettier places to live. In Providence, the city's ambitions could finally be accomplished because of the highway.
The actual construction of the highway was the spark plug that accelerated the fall of property values and the actual physical displacement of the community.
Fox Point is similar to neighborhoods across the country where after World War II, highway construction tore apart united ethnic communities. The Cross Bronx Expressway, which was finished in 1955, ran through the East Tremont neighborhood in New York City. The expressway required 159 apartment buildings to be destroyed, over 1,500 families to vacate, and caused over 5,000 people to relocate. Although an alternate route was drafted, city officials voted against it, despite protests and strong community opposition. In Chicago, the Congress Expressway caused 250 downtown homes to be demolished. African Americans in the South Side, Mexican Americans in the West Side, and immigrant neighborhoods in the Northwest Side all suffered home loss from highway construction. Between 1948 and 1956, over 6,000 families lost their homes.
It was like disbelief. This couldn't have happened. People were still, living out of the boxes of the houses that they moved.
Waves of Cape Verdeans were leaving the point. What was once a united community was now torn to shreds. As the droves of Cape Verdeans left Fox Point, an influx of middle-class professionals and professors, along with students from Brown University, began to live in the neighborhood. Fox Point was now gentrified, and like the urban renewal craze, gentrification did not just occur in Providence. The Urban Land Institute conducted a survey in 260 American cities that had 50,000 or more residents. The results showed that gentrification was taking place in roughly half of them. Following the redevelopment of Fox Point, over the next 30 years, little would be done to shed light on the displaced Cape Verdean community. In reaction to this, a documentary called Some Kind of Funny Puerto Rican was created by Andrade-Watkins, one of the first to tell a largely untold story that finally gave the Cape Verdean community a voice that it never before had. One thing that Cape Verdeans continue to have control over is their identity. The annual Cape Verdean Independence Day Festival, held every July in Fox Point, commemorates the community that once existed there. In the 1980s, highway planners felt that building a new 195 would be more efficient for traffic. Construction of the I-Way was finished in 2011. As part of the I-Way project, India Point Park in the southern half of Fox Point was rejuvenated to better serve the community, as seen by increased accessibility through an improved bridge, which is more inviting and easy to get to for neighborhood residents. As part of this reform project, several history panels were put in place to give current neighborhood residents a glimpse of the Cape Verdean community that once existed there. By taking down the old Interstate 195, over 40 acres of new space were created. The future of that space is uncertain. City planners are collaborating with residents to see which options would satisfy both groups.
While the process today actually requires community involvement, it requires that the State Department of Transportation reach out to the community.
Nationally, a reform process is taking place, as city planners and neighborhood residents are beginning to collaborate with each other more so than in the past.
There's been some lessons learned over time. They've come to be aware of what the impacts of moving entire neighborhoods are.
This more refined system has been created by looking back at the city planning and highway planning system during the 1940s, 50s, and 60s. It will characterize how we move forward as a whole, whether communities stay intact, and the future of America's urban areas.